This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders that are designing our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and I am a terrible poker player, but my guest today is not. His name is Pasha Esfandiary. He is the author of the new book, Raising the Stakes. We're going to get into his remarkable true story of how a professional poker player turned into a real estate entrepreneur and how the strategies of poker can help you in business and in life. Pasha, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm fantastic, Joe. How are you doing?
Equally fantastic. And so I want to start our conversation talking about poker because I know that's a big part of your life and the book we're going to get into. But I want to know your introduction to it. So I am one of these typical suburban white dudes who in the early 2000s stumbled across the World Series of Poker on ESPN and fell in love with the Phil Hellmuths of the world and Doyle Brunsons. And I was like, I could do that.
Yep.
And then, I would go, and I lived in the New York City area, so I'd go down to Atlantic City or go up to Connecticut to check out those casinos up there. But one thing I quickly realized is that poker's really hard, and those guys make it look really easy. So I think in my 30s when I really kind of gravitated towards it. When were you introduced to the game, and then how? At what point did you realize, oh, I'm actually pretty good at this?
Yeah, actually, it's actually kind of funny that you say that because it's kind of similar to you, but a little bit of a different experience. So in 2004, so when it got really popular, my brother actually won a big tournament and he became really famous in the poker world, right? So I don't know if you know who Antonio Esfandiary is, the magician. So that's my brother. And so right after, in 2004, I had recently dropped out of college and he won this big tournament. He kept it a secret from us. And I really kind of was just trying to discover what I was going to do. I just knew the college education system, all of it wasn't for me. I couldn't do it. And so I was like, well, if he could do it, I could do it. Right. So, brotherly competition, but I've always excelled at games, any games that I always played. We were always very competitive. We always played poker growing up. And so, it was an easy transition to get into poker from there on. And I started playing for fun. But really quickly, my little garage $20 games that I was hosting 3 times a week, I was becoming a consistent winner. And what I really realized very quickly on when I was playing games is that you just got to do what the other people are not doing, which typically in that time meant just being really aggressive, right? So I excelled at it, started playing, but I only really played $20, $50, $100 tournaments with my friends as I was being a waiter. And then there was some luck that was involved with it. And in the book that I wrote, there's a little bit of a story where somebody cheated me out of $2,000. It was all the money that I had really to my name at that time. And my brother was moving. He's like, hey, come to Vegas and, do this thing. I'll give you a little bit of money. I said, sure. And I went, and he goes, and this is right as the World Series of Poker was going on, and right as I turned 21. He said, well, just come play or come watch me play. I said, sure. Watched him play. He's like, dude, just go play. And I was like, this is a little intimidating. I haven't really played in the casino. And I lost $1,000 within 2 hours, right? And so he gave me a little bit of the extra money that he owed me for the thing that I did for him, which is move all this crap from San Francisco to Vegas. And I was down to my last $100, and I remember turning that $100 into $1,800. The next night, I turned that $1,800 into $4,400, and I went on this really massive run, being a 21-year-old, turning literally no money into about close to over 20 grand. And so then and there, I really realized the power of the mind and how to play. And so I was really playing not to lose, and instead you have to be playing to win. And again, that means being aggressive and making some calculated risks. So, and then from there on, I just started studying it like crazy. I became obsessed with it for many, many years. And that's how it's all started. It was kind of luck and coincidence and chance, and it all just kind of worked out.
That's awesome. That's such a great story. Thanks for sharing it. And so, it's funny. The one thing I learned as I started playing poker, I realized the one virtue of every great poker player, and probably, I guess, gambler too, is patience. Where did that come in? What did that trait trigger for you? Were you always sort of had that vibe of being a patient person? Or was it that you realized, if I'm going to master this, I'm going to have to be very patient?
So I think you bring up a really good point, because when I first started poker, and I think a lot of people who excel at poker or really anything in life are internally very impatient. I have a calm demeanor about myself, but ask my wife. I'm a very impatient human, and I want results fast. But you learn as you really take this seriously, you start to learn that math is always going to be in your favor if you're putting yourself in the right position. And if you believe in math the way most poker players do, you have to understand it's like the house. The house doesn't care if you play blackjack and have a 51, they have a 51 edge over 49%. For you in blackjack at playing best blackjack, over the long run, that 2% edge equates to a lot. So in poker, when you learn to make the best long-term bet all the time and follow the math, you have to learn how to be patient. You have to learn how to pick your spots. You have to learn how to identify this is the time to attack and let's go. And that typically means being a little bit more patient, taking a little bit of a back seat, and making or taking advantage of something that folds in front of you. Now, there are some poker players who are impatient that force other people to make mistakes. And so it's really about toggling to the players that you're playing against. But yeah, I mean, I've sat, in a poker seat for 36 hours before in the same game, right? That was just young, youthful energy and Adderall. And
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny too because I mean, you mentioned the kryptonite of my life, and that's the M word, math. That's
yeah,
one thing people don't realize. You can know all the ins and outs of like tells and like the soft skills, but that hard skill of math, Pasha, you know this better than anybody. If you don't have that, you could be the greatest like mind melder on the planet. If you can't do the math, you're not winning.
you're not winning. I mean, you have to know basic math. There's two types of players. There's intuitive players and there's the players that are like GTO, just mathematical players. But I'm more intuitive, but I know all the math. I know how many outs I have. I can put a range of where my opponents are at, and I can understand, this is a 50-50 call. This is a 70-80 call or 70-30 call. The odds are way in my favor. I have to take this, even if it's not in my favor and I think I'm losing the hand over the course of 1,000 hands, this is a favorable call. So you have to understand the math, at least on a like super basic level, but to really get to advanced poker, you really have to know the ins and outs of the pot odds and ranges and all those.
Hence why you're a professional and I am not. So that it's just as easy as that. People try to explain how, what are the differences? That's plain and simple right there. And so it's funny because about a year ago, I had Phil Hellmuth on the pod I mentioned
Right.
earlier, and
Well, man.
it's amazing how he has developed like the bad boy poker and all that crap that we're not going to get into now, but like this persona, and then he built a brand and a business out of it. When did you realize that your skills, the stuff you all of a sudden become this really intense like professional poker player? When did you realize you could take those skills and elevate it into something else? Because people may not know, but Phil Hellmuth does a lot of things. He may in the near future have the B word, like he might be a billionaire with all the things he's involved with. When did you realize that, okay, I've got the skill set, I'm developing a pretty good bank doing this poker thing? When did you realize you could take those skills and transport it into another realm?
I think not until later, the latter parts of my life so far. So, when I was 26 years old, I moved to Vegas. I was like, I'm going to take this really seriously. By the time I was 26, though, I really realized that this wasn't my dream. It was my brother's dream, and it was a really good way means to the end. I mean, I made really great money as a kid, and I traveled the world, and I did things that I probably shouldn't have been able to do, being so young, right? And I have very fulfilled on experiences of my life and seeing things and meeting people. But when I started playing, probably from 24 to 26, it felt more of a grind. It felt more of a job, and I wasn't as excited about it. And at 26, it really came to a head for me. Um, so what ended up happening is I ended up taking the bankroll that I had and started applying it to real estate. Well, actually, I went and interned for a family friend of ours and got the education in real estate because I always knew real estate was my end game, no matter what. Every dream that I had in poker was, to win was to go buy real estate. So I decided to translate it over.
Wait a minute, wait, hold on. You always thought about like who thinks about real estate? Like what?
Ever since I was young,
What were you thinking about?
ever since I was a child, I remember even being a teenager thinking, I can't wait to own real estate. Like that is the key to everything. It's probably because, we have a true immigration story. Me and my brother, my father moved here as a single father, raising these two children. I always heard him, and he had to work these, jobs and things that kept him away from us as, a lot. And I always heard him say, man, I wish I had bought that real estate. Man, I wish I, had owned that land or bought it when I had the money or this, and always talked about real estate. And I think I just took my father's dream and installed it when I was a child. And so I just ran with it. So I always knew I wanted to be in real estate forever. So I ended up, to fast forward to at that time of 26, I just said, hey, enough is enough. I want to go do this. I don't want to be a poker player that's grinding, hoping for a fish, hoping for a big win. I don't want to hope anymore. I want to create. And that's what I did. So, but very quickly on, about year 2 of flipping homes, I realized how fast I scaled. I mean, I remember meeting people at the same time. We were starting the same spot in doing real estate. And I just realized how fast I progressed compared to them. And I was just starting to realize, oh, like this is the poker mentality. Like, how do we make the best long-term bet? How do I learn from this? Because you always have to reassess who you are, how you are performing, and what are your results, and keeping track of everything. So I just started noticing my results were taking off faster than I think most people would. And I was like, oh, hey, there's something here. And I just kept honing in on that. And it's just still to this day, that education I got from poker was the best college education I could have ever gotten.
That's awesome. And what real estate did you start with and evolve with? Because I know real estate, as you probably know, it's a pretty broad brush.
Right.
Single families, multifamily, commercial. What were you getting into?
I've done it all. I started in single family. Then I went and moved to Los Angeles. Then I started doing land up construction on Hillside when I'd never done that before. Then I translated that into buying a motel in Vegas. And then I translated that into multifamily and apartment complexes. And then I translated that into mobile home communities, which I'm all in now on mobile home communities.
Wow, interesting. And for folks not familiar, tell us about the mobile home real estate market these days, because I think you probably know this. There's like negative connotations
For sure.
around that, and there's been a lot of reports and such about how sometimes the people that live in mobile homes get taken advantage of because of the
They
structure.
do.
Of like you own the house but not the land. It gets very complicated. So break it down for me as an expert.
Yeah, they do. So here, the problem with the sector that we're in is that there always will be bad apples, especially when there's money involved, right? So these are the guys who jack up the rents 100%, 150% on their tenants because they own the home and they can't really move the home. They don't have the money to. And so those are the people that get in the news. Obviously, we're not like that. Obviously, we are trying to make some money, but we've never jacked up the rent all that much. The most we've ever raised it was $55 per year. And so the thing about mobile home communities, to relate it back to the poker, one of the really important things in poker is not about being the best poker player, because I will be the first one to tell you that I am not the greatest poker player. In fact, I will get swept up by professionals nowadays. But the one thing that I was really good at was game selection. I was always able to get myself into a game where I was just a little bit better than every other player. That is the most important, because I don't really care about going and playing with my brothers and the pros and the Phil Hellmuth and anyone else. That never like intrigued me. I don't care. I just wanted to make money. So that's why game selection is so important. And game selection, relating it to real estate, I love that people have a stigma on mobile home communities because it keeps people out of that realm, right? It is, for me, one of the last untapped commercial real estates where I'm buying from true mom and pops. When you meet the tenants, they are actually just true workforce housing. And yes, some parks are what you see that get depicted into the movies. But again, that's a movie. And in the movie, they always exaggerate what it is. And so, typically there's just people who are just trying to get by, workforce housing, working manufacturing jobs, and great families. And we do really good by the tenants. So, but it's also just super consistent, right? It's just a different realm. It's more game selection. It's more niche. And I love that. Just kind of like how it was when in poker, I love the game selection, the more niche, like, game that you can find, the more opportunity for growth and better results.
Nice. Also, the book you also write about lifetime expected value. How does poker connect to the real estate world in terms of lifetime expected value?
I think everything that you do. So what you learn in poker is that every decision that you make, there should be an expected value of what you're making. So kind of like the reference that we were talking about earlier. If the math is in your favor, you got to make that decision, even though if you think you're losing, right? So anything that you do in real estate in lifetime expected value is that you got to make the right decision now for the future. So whenever I do anything in my life, I think what will like the 50-year-old Pasha think the 40-year-old Pasha for? So it's really a simple way to boil it down is delayed gratification. So everything that we do is delayed gratification. I'm not looking to make it short-term gain. I'm only looking for the long-term gains. And that's what we buy. That's the one thing about what I do and what my company does that's so unique is we hold our properties forever. We don't ever sell. While, a lot of other property owners do sell. So lifetime expected value is always just evaluating, hey, is this decision good for me 10 years from now? Or is it only short term? And so when you start to have it in that lens, you start to make better, more powerful decisions that compound over time. And, you take the power or take the concept of compound interest and apply it to your own life. And you will excel so fast, but it's going to take you 5 years to do that. Right. And so that's kind of how you apply it or think about lifetime expected value.
Nice. Another thing you write about in the book is tilt. Let's connect tilt from poker to real estate.
Sure. If you ever make an emotional decision, it's probably the wrong decision, right? Like in the sense of you're making financial, decisions. Sometimes you got to make, heartfelt decisions with, your relationships and all that. But typically, the best way to describe it is this. If you give advice to your friends who are in a relationship and they don't know what to do, and their spouse may not be the perfect fit for them, I always found that whenever we're able to give advice to them, it's usually typically right because we're so non-emotional about that decision. We see the facts for the facts, while the other or our friend is in an emotional response. So you could apply that to anything in your life that typically, even if you're happy and super joyful, and you're probably making the wrong decision if you're in a super emotional state. And in poker, whenever someone's on tilt, they're making really bad decisions. Or on the vice versa, which most people don't talk about, if they're really happy and cocky because they're winning a bunch and they've been drinking and they're joyful, they're probably going to make the wrong decision. So it's really about checking your own emotions, not saying don't be emotional, but when you're making decisions about your life, you've got to do it in a non-emotional way.
Wow. Yeah, emotions is always tough for me, especially when I was, again, terrible poker player. If I got off a bad hand where it was a bad beat, the next hand, I would inevitably be like, okay, I got to win this hand. Because it's, I don't know where that comes from, but it's like, it's that patience thing. Like, I think for most people, be like, after they've had a bad beat, they're like, all right, I got to win the next one. Whereas you... as you know, probably from your days of playing poker, that's not how it works. Just because you lose one doesn't mean you're going to win the next one.
I love players like you. There's been so many players in my life that once I played with them enough, because I always played in regular games, that I knew that sometimes whenever you would bad beat someone, then all their chips are unlocked. And so I would go out of my way to play really shitty cards against them, show them bluffs, try to hit some stupid hand against them in the right situation just so that we could unlock their chips.
Nice, Pasha. Good to know. Well, I will not be playing poker with you. I know all your secrets now. All right. So you kind of mentioned your company, Evo Capital. How did this all fit? I mean, we get the transition from poker to real estate, but as we know, many forms of real estate. You found one niche. But tell us why it was important to start up this company and how it kind of fits in this whole world that you've created over the last couple of decades.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I never set out to make Evo Capital, to be honest with you. I just ran out of money buying mobile home communities. And it was just that powerful question, what would 10 years from now Pasha would want me to do? And there was just a market opportunity, and the expertise that myself and my partners have in this industry was bar none compared to a lot of other operators. And I just said, we have a moment in time where there's a ripe opportunity that we could take advantage of. And that really is what happened. We had a pipeline of deals coming our way. We had an employee kind of helping us with our first few deals. And I just said, well, you know what, we're out of money, but so then what do we have to do? Well, we have to syndicate our first deal. And then, that led into the second, third, fourth, fifth deal. And then, well, all right, let's create a fund and let's create another fund. And it just is now, I never really meant to create Evo Capital. It just happened out of necessity. But I believe that the best businesses always happen organically. I love what we're doing. I love what we're building. We have like almost 35 full-time employees right now. And so we're growing. We're still a younger company. We're 3 years old, but we're also returning, things 2 years in advance. We're going full cycle on a bunch of deals right now in this market. So really proud of what we're building, really proud of what we've been able to do for our investors as well too. So Yep.
That's awesome. And how do you fit in this world of a perpetual housing crisis? I mean, I feel like it's always been around, and then 2008 happened, and all of a sudden people are like, stop building homes. Then all of a sudden the Fed got involved and lowered the mortgage rates to like unprecedented levels, and then you saw this huge spike, and then all of a sudden let's raise the mortgage rates again. Okay, no,
Um,
now we've got this housing crisis. How does the mobile home factor into that? Does it,
yeah.
how can you help? Because I know in a lot of communities, it's a space issue, especially if you live in an urban area, there's not much room. You do what you can. And then obviously what you do is you start building out, whether it's further away into suburbs, into other areas. How do you fit into this whole mess of the housing crisis?
Well, one thing I can tell you is that unfortunately, there's no low-income housing being built. There's more mobile home communities that are being destroyed every single year than are being built. The reason for that is cities and counties don't want mobile home communities because of what we talked about earlier, the stigma around it, and they just don't want low income in their cities. And so, as land becomes more scarce and cities are getting built out, more and more, developers are buying mobile home communities, destroying them, and then building whatever they need to be building on there. So we're building way less than we're destroying a lot more than we're building. And then unfortunately, there's no other low income housing solution that's being built right now in America, right? But on the capitalist side, that's one thing I enjoy about this sector because it's the only sector of real estate where our demand is growing from our tenant base, but the supply is dwindling, right? Unless the government steps in, and which I think they should, and subsidize more low income housing, I don't see this issue being solved anytime soon. I don't see this administration subsidizing any of the low income housing right now. Things have just gotten too expensive, and there's a lot of ways, I think we can go about it. But I do hope, it's my genuine hope, is that technology advances enough that we can fix this problem. Because Joe, the demand we get for each of our parks is insane. That was the thing that surprised me the most when I got into this industry, is that whenever we go to acquire a new property, we do a test ad. And the first test ad I ever did, I could not believe how inundated we got with requests to move into our mobile home communities. It was insane. We had to turn it off within 12 hours because we got so many people wanting to move in. So the demand is insane, and the demand is there. And unfortunately, the way our country is going, well, really anywhere, is that the middle class is getting squeezed more and more, right? So the only way to fix that is we got to bring more jobs here, and we got to use technology to leverage cheaper goods and to be able to build for cheaper. Because right now, the way it goes, it's just too expensive for the average American.
Yeah, it's funny, I know more than I should know about housing, just because working with clients who have work in the affordable housing industry. And the one thing that is sort of, and you kind of hinted at in terms of the mobile home, is like people don't want mobile home communities because of the stigma we talked about, but also the original builds of these mobile home parks were, as you know, pretty gross. Like,
Yeah.
they essentially built them in the 70s and left them alone. And that's sort of what happened with the affordable housing, with a lot of these public housing. They built these garish buildings that are gray with very little ventilation. Stuff doesn't work. And then all of a sudden you have this NIMBYism, like, if that's what affordable housing is going to look like, I don't want that in my community.
Correct.
Whereas instead of it being intentional and building a community where people will want to live, then you have that issue. And the same goes with mobile parks. I mean, I'm sure the parks you have are pretty phenomenal and look great, but I think people can shake that they have this vision of the mobile park where, cars are up on blocks. It looks, things are a mess. How can we, merging those two, the public housing issues of like the way they built it and like did it poorly, and then those original mobile parks, how they did it and did it poorly. How can we do this right?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of good operators out there, and I want to put ourselves in that same category, that we do actually do good by the tenants. Like every park that we go by, we have a ton of CapEx that we have to do. We always typically do the roads, the lighting, the landscaping, put in better property managers, put in better systems. And we have, in the states that we buy, we have all the rights to kick out the bad tenants, right? The tenants that make other people feel unsafe. So we're just a microcosm of the little things that we're doing. We're making communities safer in that sense. But, really at the end of the day, I'm not really sure what you could be doing for the low income housing unless the government steps in a big way, right? The sad thing about this, Joe, is that what we realize is that how propaganda really dictates everything that we see and think about, right? As American culture, kind of like what you're talking about. Unfortunately, when we're watching movies as kids and we get these things that are depicted to us, it's just what we have in the back of the mind. No one really just wakes up and says, I just want to research what mobile home communities look like, unless you live there. But we've been in some really nice mobile home communities before. Like, luckily I had a friend that I would go visit, lived in a great mobile home community. It was lovely. Everyone was super nice. It was a nice community. So I had a different image getting into this industry. But if you don't, the average American doesn't research it. They don't know about it. It's just in the back of their mind from all the movies they've seen. And so they just stay away from it. And people don't want to even take a look at it or see what we're trying to do. Right. And so a lot of cities get in our way of trying to expand because they don't want any more units or lots. But everywhere has a low income housing crisis everywhere.
How does prefab housing fit in what you do? Because that's exploded over the last few years. I think even like a company Elon Musk bought into, like
Yeah.
Boxable. Like it's and for people who don't know, it's basically it's pre-built houses that they just drop in an area, and all of a sudden you have a house. It's not like built with sticks and bricks. Can you work in that space in terms of like building a quote unquote a mobile park, but it being prefab homes? Is that something you've looked into?
So when I was developing, that's what I looked into. And right as I got out of developing, it seemed like, and I looked at Boxable, the prefab homes, in my opinion, are better homes than most stick build homes. And you don't have all the waste as well, too. That is what I mean by technology. But still, at the end of the day, how expensive it is to get prefab for low income housing, it's still not there. The delta is not there. Land values too high still. The infrastructure, cities don't make it typically easy on you to install prefab, but it is a trend that I love. That's why I do say technology is the only thing that's going to help us in this industry, because it is so needed. I was going to start developing prefab homes when I was developing instead of stick built homes, because every time I went to my property and my development, I hated the huge containers of just trash that you have to offload. It's like 4 of those huge containers and every single build. It just drove me nuts, right? So that's why technology will do it. But again, goods right now are becoming more expensive. There's tariffs that are happening. So it's always kind of in the state of flux.
So in a perfect world, though, you could see it, especially if costs go down and the technology improves. Like there are companies like I mentioned, Boxable, that are doing this at a pretty large scale, that in 20, 30 years, your typical standard mobile home park could be a prefab home park, right?
I would hope so.
If the numbers work.
I would hope so. I really would hope so. I genuinely want something to happen where there's another low income housing solution, right? And I do think the general population just want a roof over their heads and they're willing to take a little bit less square feet, but it's also about not cramming them into a small like community. Like I don't think tiny homes are going to work. I love what it's doing. I just don't think it's going to work because no one long term wants to live in one of those. People need at least some space, at least 800, 900 square feet to be happy and content. In my opinion, I could be wrong. This is just an opinion, but I do know that technology will get to the point where we can build for cheaper and as much quality as well, which is what I'm hoping for.
Awesome. Yeah, well, we all are. All right. So, Pasha, I like to wrap up these conversations by taking folks behind the dedication of the book. And you dedicate it to Jessica, Taj, and Zoe. You are my heart, my home, and my reason for everything. And to my aunt, Gigi, for always being there at every stage of my life. So, obviously, Jessica, I think is your wife, and you have your kids there. Before I ask why you dedicate it, 26-year-old guy spending 36 hours playing poker to father of 2 with a company. Does it seem like you're living a different life?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. A huge transformation had to happen at 26. Also at 26, I went through an emotional intelligence course. And so I dedicated a few years of my life to coaching and learning this new way about me, because I knew whatever I had and the tools I had wasn't working for what I wanted in my life. So as much as my life is completely different, I have stayed adamant to try to have that childlike wonder and play and fun in my life, because I just will never become that guy who is not having fun. It's just work and it's just family. So total goofball always having fun with my family, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
That's awesome. Tell me about Gigi.
So without getting too far into it, you know, mother stayed back in Iran. Father was working all the time. Very tough on myself personally, not really feeling like I had many parents around me. Gigi was the only one that always was there for me emotionally. She was there for me, always checking in on me. And she was like my mother figure for me, even though she had her own life and her own kids and couldn't always be there, but she always made time for me. And I think that just was really important. And that still means the world to me today.
His name is Pasha Esfandiary. The book, Raising the Stakes, Professional Poker Strategies for Winning in Business and in Life. Pasha, thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate you.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Pasha and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.